Hi. Okay, this is A New Nigeria with Olawale Olubade. I'll be speaking this afternoon on what I've titled Why Leaders Fail. Why Leaders Fail. Think of any historical leaders throughout history who failed, or think of the ones you know locally and how they failed in spectacular fashion. Why? Why did they fail? There are a number of reasons why leaders fail. Now, I am not here referring only to political leaders, but I'm also including business leaders, religious leaders, traditional institutions, bureaucrats, etc. For instance, I'm a core private sector person, the kind we figuratively call technocrats in Nigeria. I'm one of such. I have seen big corporations die and disappear. Why? What happened? I mean, there are banks, if I mention them, they disappeared. In fact, some of those banks, some of the insurance companies were the CEOs, were pastors, very religious people. In fact, in some of those places, they had morning devotions, they were reading the Bible and all of that. But they did something that we're looking at today, and they died, they ceased to exist. So why do leaders fail? I'll speak about a more critical, indeed, the most important factor in the failure of leaders, but it is the least talked about or focused on. I'll use 3 historical stories to highlight this factor and thereafter summarize my conclusions. Here's the first story. There was a king of Israel called Rehoboam. He was the son of King Solomon. King Solomon was reputed as the wisest man, as the wisest man to have ever lived in his era. Now, when King Rehoboam, the son of King Solomon, ascended the throne, the elders of his country came to him and offered him wise counsel, to stave off imminent rebellion from the people. So King Rehoboam told the elders who came to him to give him time, to consider their request, and they should return at a later date for his response. After the elders left, he gathered his drinking buddies, his friends, his age mates, together, and asked their counsel about what the elders had told him. Now, his friends, told him to ignore the elders, that they were talking nonsense. Rather, he should do the opposite of what they asked him to do, and Rehoboam did as his friends, told him. He did what his friends advised. What was the consequence? The kingdom that was handed over to him by his father, Solomon, was divided in two. In fact, it was divided, it was divided in two, but if I said it was divided in two, that would be incorrect. The kingdom was split 80 to 20%. So Rehoboam was left with 20%, and the rebellious part took 80% of the kingdom that was handed over to King Rehoboam. Why? Because he took wrong, counsel. Now, and this makes me realize that evidently wisdom isn't hereditary. You do not inherit wisdom from your parents. You don't inherit any of the leadership skills, competence, education, knowledge, wisdom. These are not, hereditary traits or skills to be inherited. You can read this story, find this story in the Bible. Now, but Rehoboam's case was a minor, situation. The second story is deeply profound for those who wish to learn. There was another king who came, centuries later after Rehoboam. His name was Ahab, King Ahab. One day, his brother king, now the kingdom has been divided into two. So, Ahab was king over, the portion that was 80%. Now, his brother king, who was king over the 20%, from Rehoboam, his name was Jehoshaphat. He came to visit King Ahab, and while they were, discussing, bantering, Rehoboam said, and Ahab said to his brother King Jehoshaphat, let's go to war, let's go and fight Syria. That place, one of the cities of Syria belonged to us before. So King Jehoshaphat said to Ahab, okay, that's no problem, but let's consult a prophet, as it was in their custom. Before they did anything, they would ask God. And one of the ways they did was to consult one of the genuine prophets of God. So they called, and so they said, let's consult a prophet. And Ahab responded that, all the prophets, so all my 400 prophets, advisors, they have advised that I go to war. That God, the Spirit of God has, told them that God has given him the victory. But Jehoshaphat still expressed the desire that there must still be a prophet left, and they should inquire further. They should make further inquiries. Now, Ahab stated that indeed there was such a prophet, but he, Ahab, doesn't like the guy, the prophet that was remaining, that he does not like him, because this prophet that is remaining doesn't tell him good things, in inverted comma, but only bad things. Jehoshaphat said, the visiting king, Jehoshaphat said, Ahab, that kings don't speak like that. Oh king, my brother king, please don't talk like that. Call this guy, let him come and tell us also his own opinion. So they sent messengers to go fetch, the name of this prophet, the king didn't like. His name was Micaiah. Now, when he came, one of the messengers that brought him advised him to say, you know what, let your counsel align with the rest of the prophets. Give the king encouraging words, in inverted commas, meaning lies, or tales, fairy tales. So Micaiah began, he played along, he was flattering the kings, But when King Ahab remonstrated with him, he changed tack. Now, he told the kings, both kings, who were seated on their thrones and decked out, in all their royal splendor and majesties, that he saw a vision of heaven. And God held court. God sat on his throne in heaven, holding court. And on his right and on his left, the hosts of heaven stood, angels of heaven, angels of God in heaven. They stood in the presence of God on both his right and on his left, in their innumerable number, of angels, And God spoke out and said, who will entice, and I quote, who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth Gilead, a Syrian city, and going to his death there? End of quote. Various angels came forward and gave ideas, but God wasn't impressed. God expressed the desire that I want Ahab to go and die, but I don't know how to go about it. And this speaks to the capacity of God, that God lacks the capacity to do evil. Anyway, let me not run ahead of myself. So angels came and gave ideas, but God was not impressed. Finally, one angel came forward and said, I have the idea you want. And God asked, by what means? Let's hear it. And this angel said, I would entice him. I will go and become a lying spirit in the mouths of all Ahab's prophets, so they can convince him to go to war. End of quote. When God heard this, he was impressed and said, you will succeed in enticing him. Go and do it. End of quote. Micaiah said further, so now the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouths of all these your prophets. The Lord has decreed disaster for you. End of quote. When I get to heaven, I have some of these, wishes that when I get to heaven, I said I would ask David. I want to ask David, how did you kill a lion? Because I've seen videos of lions. Even the videos I see of lions, I cringe, in utter fear. So I want to know how David killed the lion. I would ask Angel Michael, open the video, let me see. Show me the video of how David killed. I believe David, I believe the Bible explicitly. Anyway, so I want to ask this prophet Micaiah when I get to heaven, the sheer audacity. Do you know what it means to stand before two kings with their coterie of hangers-on, advisors, lieutenants, and they have the audacity to say what he said? I want to ask that guy. Anyway, now, the leader of the 400 horde of lying demons or prophets wouldn't take it lightly. He stepped forward and slapped Micaiah, gave him a dirty slap, saying, from where did the lying spirit come into my mouth? He slapped the guy. That where did the demon, the lying spirit, enter into my mouth? This particular story sounds like a classic Shakespeare masterpiece with an intricately woven plot, with twists and turns and tragic denouement. It is one of my favorite top 10 powerful stories in the Bible. Anyway, Ahab went and he even tried to outsmart God. Guess what? He put on a disguise and even wore body armor. Since God was stupid and God doesn't see. Wicked people doing evil think God doesn't see or God is stupid. But one soldier shot during battle. One soldier shot an arrow randomly, and the arrow hit Ahab by the joints. You remember I put on a body armor? By the joints, where they tied the whatever. The arrow did not hit any other part where it will not penetrate. The arrow was directed at where the joints that was open, and it hit Ahab. Now, I believe an angel guided that arrow, this being the first recorded instance of a guided missile technology thousands of years before man will understand, apply the science and technology and its practical applications, that is, of guided missile technology. Anyway, so Ahab bled on the streets like a dog and died from his wounds. You need to read this story in the Bible. It's powerful. What are some critical lessons for humble leaders globally from this story? Number one, liars and sycophants are to kings, presidents, governors, and all leaders, all types of leaders, what flies are to dead bodies, or ants are to sugar or food. I have a great video on my study of the ants. I'll upload it very soon. It's powerful. So, liars and sycophants, once again, are to kings, to presidents, to governors and leaders, all types of leaders. What flies are to dead bodies, what ants are to sugar. You don't need to look for them. Once you get into position, they find you and they come. Number two, leaders who love lies will attract these in large numbers. Number three, that these sycophants and liars are more in number and even in their quality around a leader isn't proof they are speaking the truth. You can have a PhD or you can be a professor and still be a liar. You can be a prophet or an imam or whatever and still be a liar. So kings who are taking advice from such people, will destroy themselves. Number four, leaders intrinsically know the truth and know the sycophants are lying. But a deep flaw in some of these leaders, propels them to prefer lies to truth. Everyone has a conscience. Ahab knew these guys were lying. Ahab said with his mouth that he does not like this guy because this guy doesn't tell him what he wants to hear. And that's what destroyed him. He listened to those who told him what he wanted to hear, and he died. He paid the price. He knew the truth, but he chose lies. Fifth, leaders fail. This is the crux of the matter. Leaders fail not necessarily because they are illiterate or of this ethnicity or that ethnicity or this religion or that religion. Leaders fail essentially because of the character of those they listen to and trust the most. For Ahab, his greatest undoing were his wife and his advisors. The story of Ahab's wife, Jezebel, is a different matter entirely, not for today. In fact, the reason why God wanted to kill him was because of the conduct, the behavior, the witchcraft, the sorcery, the voodoo practices of his wife Jezebel, who killed a man to take what belonged to the man, a man's land, and give to Ahab, a spineless man. Now, finally, let me ask you, number 6, what do you think happened to the 400 so-called prophets who advised Ahab to sleepwalk, open hide to his doom? What happened to them? Of course, your answer is as good as mine. As I conclude, here's the story. I told you there were 3 stories. So the third story, Jesus also got unsolicited advice from an overzealous disciple that could have completely derailed the plan of God for mankind. Last week, Christians just celebrated Easter. But if Jesus had listened to the passionate and overzealous advice of Peter, one of his closest disciples, there will be no Christianity today, talk less of celebrating Easter. So, as I wrap up, whose advice are you taking? At the end, a leader is only as great and successful as their closest advisors. Any leader, is only as great and successful as their closest advisors. Thank you for listening. Now, please share this video because it's very important. Share this video to everyone in leadership position that you know and you have access to. You might be saving somebody. Thank you and God bless you.